Dana White's Contender Series. This is Season 7, Episode 6. We have a full 5-fight card lined up this Tuesday night. I'm John Kelly. Let's hear the picks. We're going to get things started in the bantamweight division with Gene Matsumoto, a minus 140 favorite. The comeback on Casey Tanner is plus 120. And we'll start on the Matsumoto side. He's a 13-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Brazil. He's the former standout fighting bantamweight champion, and he also previously fought over in LFA. His last 2 fights, he holds a black belt in Muay Thai and a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he just seems to have a pretty well-rounded skill set. 8 of his 13 wins have come by finish. On the feet, he does have power, but he doesn't let his hands go super often. You know, he's not really aggressive. He's mainly looking to land some heavy calf kicks, looking to counter you and go to the ground game. He's got solid wrestling. I mentioned the black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's able to control guys on the mat and potentially threaten to submit them as well. The one concern with him is that I have seen him be taken down and controlled at times as well. So even though he's pretty solid offensively in terms of the ground game, I do think better wrestlers, better grapplers can potentially take advantage of that. And the last thing that I'll say is he has really good cardio. You know, he doesn't seem to get tired. I mentioned the output isn't super high volume, and maybe that's a reason why, but he's been tested over 25 minutes multiple times in his career, and the cardio certainly checks out. Now, on the flip side, Casey Tanner is a 5-0 prospect fighting out of Illinois. He trains at Fight Ready. 4 of his 5 wins have come by knockout, but he's faced very low competition on the regional scene, fought just one guy with a winning record. And in terms of the skill set, he's kind of very similar to Matsumoto. On the feet, you know, he's not super polished, does have some really heavy leg kicks, but mainly just looking to counter you. And then he goes to his wrestling, and he holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I just think he's kind of a similar style of Matsumoto, whereas I think Matsumoto's just a little bit more polished, a little bit more physical. So I'm going to lean on the Matsumoto side. I do think he's the rightful favorite, but I'm going to say Matsumoto by decision because I think both of these guys are competent enough not to get submitted on the mat. Both of them could land a takedown or two. And then on the feet, I just think it's pretty, you know, low volume. Both guys trading calf kicks and looking to counter each other. So I actually really like the overs depending on what price we're going to get. They haven't released the totals yet, but I'll be looking to play an over 2.5 here, potentially sprinkle a decision prop. But the official pick is Matsumoto by decision. He's going to kick things off in the DGen parlay. Which brings us to our next fight in the women's strawweight division as Julia Palastri comes in as a minus 375 favorite, the biggest betting favorite on the card. The comeback on Patricia Alujas is plus 300, and this one's pretty straightforward to me. Palastri is actually making her return to the Contender Series. She previously fought on Contender Series against Jasmine Jasudavicius, and she really just struggled with the size and the wrestling of Jasmine Jasudavicius, who's kind of making a nice career for herself in the UFC. So it's not the worst loss there. She's an 11-3 prospect fighting out of Brazil, and since that Jasmine lost, she's actually fought over an LFA and earned finishes in her last 2 fights. She's a very powerful striker, pretty well-rounded. The one leak is that defensive grappling, and that's what Jasmine was able to take advantage of. Jasmine just being the much bigger fighter. So I think Palastri really struggled with the size, but on the feet, she's a pretty powerful striker, keeps a high output, and I think in order to take advantage of her, you need to be able to land takedowns and be a very physical grappler, and I just don't see that from Alujas, who's actually fought only once in the past 4 years. You know, she's coming off a 2-year layoff, but prior to that was basically on another 2-year layoff, and she hasn't really fought anybody on the regional scene. You know, she's fighting out of Paraguay. She hasn't really been tested, seems to just have a generic skill set. I don't think she has the grappling to take advantage of Palastri's holes, and I think on the feet, she's probably just going to get boxed up. Palastri's going to be landing more effectively, landing the bigger shots as well. So we're going to go with Palastri by decision. She's a big favorite, but I think she gets her hand raised here. Next fight up in the featherweight division, Nguyen comes in as a minus 240 favorite. The comeback on AJ Cunningham is plus 200, and this is a fun stylistic matchup between Nguyen, who previously fought on Contender Series, and that was 2 seasons ago. He won a decision over Theo Rylang, but it just wasn't impressive enough to Uncle Dana, where he didn't get the contract, and he hasn't fought since, but he's been in the gym, no big injuries or any big reason for the long layoff here. And in terms of his style, you know, he's primarily a striker, training out of Fortis MMA, pretty solid technical boxer, can be taken down, but pretty difficult to take down on the first attempt and usually pretty good at working back to his feet as well. But it's really just the boxing. You know, he's a pretty crisp boxer, a little bit one-dimensional. And the one career loss was the knockout to Alon Cruz on Contender Series multiple years ago. So he's actually getting his third Contender Series fight here. So they really want this guy to get a win and a highlight win and get him in the UFC. On the flip side, AJ Cunningham is a friend and training partner of Bryce Mitchell. He fights out of Arkansas. He's a 10-2 prospect. You know, he's got a bunch of wins on the regionals team by finish, but he's barely really been tested, you know, most of them being pretty low-level wins. And I think the skill set, you know, his best asset is that he's just super tough, right? Like, he's not the most polished striker. I do think Nguyen's going to be the better technical striker here, the better boxer for sure. Cunningham has holes defensively pretty much everywhere. Like, this guy can be hit, he can be tagged, but he's just super tough, going to keep coming forward. He can mix in the takedowns as well. I just struggle with, if he's unable to get the takedowns, I think he probably starts to get touched up here by Stephen Nguyen. So that's why I'm going to side with Nguyen. But the line is starting to blow out to the point where I think it's probably you either bet Cunningham or pass, unless you're just, you know, parlaying multiple favorites here. But Cunningham, I think, has the potential to make this a closer fight than a lot of people suggest. But I just think in terms of skill set, it's got to be Stephen Nguyen here as the cleaner striker. I think he gets his hand raised. We're going Nguyen by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Hanna Denise coming in as a -120 favorite. The comeback on Eduardo Nevis is +100. And we'll start on the Denise side. He's a 5-0 undefeated prospect. All of his wins have come by knockout. All of them in the first round, never been extended. He actually comes from a Glory kickboxing background. We know the striking pedigree is there. We know he has big power. But in terms of MMA, he just hasn't been tested. You know, these are very low, bottom of the barrel wins on the regional scene. His cardio is entirely unproven unless you go back to the kickboxing days. And as you guys know, kickboxing is not the same as MMA. And we've seen multiple times, even this season, former Glory kickboxers just kind of get exposed to a degree, even on Contender Series. So that is one note of concern. On the flip side, Eduardo Nevis is a 7-1 prospect fighting out of Brazil. He actually fought on last season of Contender Series against Mick Parkin, and he had a little bit of success early, but then it was like as soon as he realized he wasn't going to get Parkin out of there and Parkin started to have some success, it was just like, GG, I'm ready to go home. And I just can't get that image out of my head. Like, this dude just seems to have a lot of quit in him. If he doesn't bomb on you early and get you out of there, and as soon as he starts to face adversity, I just can't trust him. So it's a coin flip fight. Both of these guys are powerful. Both of these guys are capable of winning by early knockout. I'm just going to side with the guy who's a little bit cleaner in terms of the striking with the former kickboxing background. I actually expect him to be the more aggressive of the two, and I think he carries a little bit more power as well. So we're going to go with Denise. He's a slight favorite in a coin flippy type fight, but I am going to side with him to get his hand raised. Which brings us to our main event in the lightweight division, as James Lantop comes in as a -180 favorite with the comeback on Malik Lewis at +150. And to keep with the theme of the card, Malik Lewis also fought on Contender Series last season. He was knocked out by Trevor Peek. That's actually his only professional loss. He's a 6-1 prospect fighting out of Texas, and most of his wins have come by knockout. He's actually only reached the third round once in his career, and that was his last fight where he did get that third round stoppage. But I just don't think Malik Lewis is really all that talented. I don't trust his durability either. I know he got the win in his last fight, but he did get dropped in that fight early on as well. So I don't know, man. Malik Lewis doesn't really do it for me. You know, he's an okay striker, typical low-level finish or be finish style of fighter. And then on the flip side, James Lantop, I don't really like this guy either. Like, I don't think he's very good. He's a 13-2 prospect fighting out of Peru, and he definitely seems a little more proven. You know, he's fought a lot more guys, some okay guys with decent records on the regional scene, and he's actually put together an 11-fight win streak here. But then you look at the tape, and it just really hasn't been that impressive for me. You know, I talked about Lewis getting dropped in his last fight. Lantop also got dropped in his last fight, and he was able to persevere and end up getting his hand raised. But I do think he's probably the rightful favorite, just because both of these guys are probably going to land some shots. Don't really trust the durability of either of them, but I do think Lantop is just a little bit more durable, a little bit tougher, and I think it's not just the striking that he can go to. You know, he likes to hold his opponents up against the cage, control them in that area, control them in the clinch, peel them to the ground. He can land takedowns. I do think he's probably more likely of the two to spend time in top position as well. So it's one where I don't really think either of these guys are any stud prospect by any means, but I do think Lantop is probably the rightful favorite and gets his hand raised here. We're going Lantop by TKO. That's the official pick, and he's going to round things out in the DGen parlay. So to recap for the DGen parlay, in the first fight of the night, we're going Gene Matsumoto. I think this one's a close competitive fight. Both guys are similar. I just think Matsumoto's a little bit more polished. I think that's going to be the difference here in the first fight. In the second fight, Julia Palastri, she's a big favorite, but I think it's warranted. Much more tested, much more proven, better striker, more powerful. She gets it done in the second fight of the night. In the third fight, we're going with my guy, Nguyen. Third time's a charm. Back on Contender Series. He's the cleaner striker. He's got to keep the fight standing, keep it at range, and I think he'll get his hand raised here. In the fourth fight, it's a big heavyweight coin flip style fight, but we're going with the guy who I think is going to be more aggressive and more powerful with the kickboxing background. We're going Denise to get his hand raised in the fourth fight. And then, of course, in the main event, we're going with James Lantop. I just think he's a more well-rounded martial artist, going to mix in the cage control, mix in the takedowns, and hopefully get his hand raised. We're going Lantop in the fifth fight, and that's going to round things out in the DGen parlay. As always, guys, appreciate you watching. Best of luck. We'll see you next time.